Welcome to Harbor Point TV. This is a brand new version of our online service specifically designed with you in mind, with our weekend message and then space to respond in thought, reflection, and prayer in worship. Whether you're watching at home with family or amongst friends, listening to the podcast on your commute or even a run, our hope is that you might find and take your next step towards Jesus, whatever that might be. And in this new portable format, we invite you to share it with others. So to get more information, get connected, or to make a contribution, visit our website at harborpoint.church. This is Harbor Point TV.
Hey everyone, this is HPTV from Harbor Point Church in San Juan Capistrano, California. My name is Jeff McGuire. It is good to be with you. Let me ask you, as you think about it, when you try to recall the last time you received an invitation, like you went to the mail, you got like a wedding invitation, if you got kids, back, think a couple months ago, or 8 months ago, whatever, when we were still in school and kids would come home with like an invitation in their backpack and they'd say, look, so-and-so's having a party, I want to go, and all that kind of, just think about, what that looks like. Maybe you got a text message or an evite, remember evites, or an email, something like that that was like, look, someone's invited you to something and you know it. Now, what do you do with it? In our house, for the longest time, maybe you're this way too, if it's in the mail, we'll take it and we'll put it on the fridge. We don't have we have a stainless steel fridge, so not magnetic. We have to tape stuff to our refrigerator, or if we're out of tape, not joking you, we'll use a Band-Aid and put it on there. And it's kind of gross. I mean, it's a clean Band-Aid, but I mean, it still looks like, what in the world is going on here? We have lots of Band-Aids, but not enough tape evidently. But are you the kind of person, you get an invitation, you immediately respond? You know what, here it is. I need to let them know as a courtesy to the host, I'm in or I'm out, or here's why I'm a maybe, and you let them know right away. Are you a person more like me? And I actually think, by the way, that's like the way to go. As soon as you know, tell the person right away. Everybody appreciates it, whatever. Are you a person like me where it causes you stress, where it's like, oh my gosh, there's going to be people. I have to make plans. If I make plans, that means I can't make other plans. There's going to be people there that I'm not sure who's going to be there. So I got to figure out who's going to be there before I say yes. And then I start realizing how insecure I am about those other people. And then I start thinking, I can gauge how important this person is in my life by how much money I'm going to spend on whatever gift I'm getting them for whatever thing they're inviting me to. And then I feel guilty about that, but it's all true and everybody does it anyway, but it's all part of the same thing. And I'm all wrapped up and all I got was, boop, you want to come to this. That's all I got, but I'm all wrapped up in it. If you're a newly married guy, I'm going to give you 5 words you maybe are just now learning to use, and they are some of the most critical, most helpful words you'll ever employ in your entire life. They're 5 words. You get an invitation, hey, we're all playing basketball down at such and such gym. You should come join us. The next 5 words that you text back or call back or respond back with are as follows. Let me ask my wife. That will save you a world of hurt, right? What about the things you don't want to attend? Like you get an invitation, you don't want to go. Or do you work out some elaborate avoidance kind of method? Are you working up some excuses to try to figure out like, oh, I've got a cough. I don't know, can't have a cough around anybody now. Cough anywhere and everyone tackles you, SWAT team jumps on you, whatever. Because it's serious. We got serious stuff. Maybe that's it. Are you worried about hurting people's feelings? Whatever else that might be. Or what if you really, really, really want to go, but you can't or you shouldn't go? What do you do then? Now, today we're going to talk about an invitation to which all of us say yes all the time. And it's an invitation that gets us lost in the weeds way more often than we'd like to admit. Now, a few weeks ago, we started a series, and it's for anybody who's ever been overwhelmed or felt like they're falling behind or unable to catch up, who has been buried in the details. It's for anybody who's ever, has the ability to kind of move between the hyper-focus on some things to just outright procrastination on others. For anybody who's ever found themselves unable to gain any ground. All of us, it turns out, which includes everybody for sure. All of us, it turns out, get lost in the weeds some of the time. Now, with that in mind, and in the broadest, most universal sense, whether you're a Jesus-y kind of person, you're a churchy person, or not at all, you've been away from church for a long time, all of us find ourselves lost in the weeds because of this one thing, temptation. Doesn't matter who you are, I don't care who you are, every single one of us finds ourselves lost in the weeds because of temptation. Now, all of us can think of, we all are familiar with it, maybe we're too familiar with the idea of temptation, but as we think about it, I found that most people don't think about it in the way that I want to characterize it today, because I think this is probably one of the most helpful things I've ever heard as we talk about this idea, because every one of us knows this, but we don't think about it the way I want us to think about it, which is this: temptation is just an invitation. Temptation is just an invitation. It's this, in its simplest form, that's all that temptation is. But it's a very specific category of invitation because it's not mandatory. It's not a court-ordered thing. There's no, obligation to do so. It has no authority over us. But this invitation is so compelling because it's an invitation to self-service and self-interest. That's what temptation is. It's an invitation to self-service and self-interest. In other words, we get an invite from time to time to bend the arc of the universe around ourselves. I mean, it's not like anybody really has much temptation with or struggles with the idea of their secret struggle isn't to be selfless. It's not like I have a hidden little thing I don't tell anybody about where I just really am genuinely altruistic and I'm just going around helping everybody else out. And man, I'm trying to resist that. No. Our temptation and the invitation that a temptation is, that's a lot of shuns there, but that is just merely, it is an invite to self-service. That's all that it is. Now, when it comes to this subject, we get lost in the weeds when it comes to temptation. We get lost in the weeds by simply doing one thing. We get lost in the weeds when it comes to all of this stuff by doing one thing, which is this: by accepting the invitation to meet legitimate needs by illegitimate means. In other words, part of the reason why it's so compelling, part of the reason why the temptation is so easy to fall into is because it's actually addressing a legitimate need. At least that's the promise in it. We're trying to figure out how do we address a legitimate need, but the problem is that its delivery method or the way that we go about it is illegitimate in its means. It's a thing deep within us, and that's why it's so easy to fall into it, because whether we're experiencing loneliness or a search for love or for meaning or for a purpose or for, we're trying to escape from fear or find some adventure or we're longing for safety or significance. And though we may not say it out loud, we don't really often want a way out of it because we feel like our needs, our deep needs, are being addressed. And sometimes we just don't know another way. We also know that there is way more at stake than we'd like to admit to ourselves. We know it, but we don't like to talk about it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of go quick through it, like the definitive passage on the subject. It comes to us from the end of, we kind of pick it up at the end of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 3. So Matthew 3, end of it's verse 16 and 17. Check this out. Jesus has just been baptized. Here's what happens. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water, and at that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. Alighting is just a really cool way of saying landing on him. So somehow, whatever it is that they're witnessing in this moment, it appears as though the Spirit of God lands on Jesus like a dove. It's kind of incredible. Then here's what happens. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." So Jesus comes up out of the water. Spirit lands on him like a dove, and then a voice. "This is my Son. I love him. I'm well pleased with him." That's what happens. Now, I want you to just really quickly understand what's going on here. As this is going on, there's all this divine favor and all this stuff that happens. The very next thing, now this is the end of chapter 3. We go right into chapter 4, which says this, "Then," which means there's not a long period. There's not a period of time. It wasn't like one day Jesus was. It's no. He's baptized, and then this is what happens. Here's the very next thing that happens. "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness." It doesn't say then Jesus was led by the Spirit to the front of the parade. It doesn't say then Jesus was led by the Spirit to a giant party where everyone welcomed him. No. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for an incredibly specific purpose: to be tempted by the devil. I love my Son. He's the best. I'm well pleased. Let's take him into the desert and let him be tempted. This is incredibly bizarre. I mean, there's so many questions here. I can't get into all those questions. Some of your wheels are spinning. I'm not going to be able to tackle all the questions that you have because I'm not even sure I could answer them if I tried. Nevertheless, I just want you to get what's happening here. Jesus is purposely being led into the wilderness. Now, the reason why that is because there's a curious thing about the word temptation. In the Greek, this word parasmos is literally the same word as the word test. So temptation and test, they're one and the same, right? So it's really important to capture here because throughout the Bible, all the precedent is this, that there's a precedent in the Bible that every person who's about to do some great work in the Bible is first tested. So Abraham, if you know that story, or Joseph, not Joseph, who's raised in Jesus in the first, not that Joseph in Egypt, that Joseph with the dream coat, Donny Osmond or whatever, if you're familiar with that. So you got you got Abraham, and then you got Joseph, you got Moses and David. And so there's just constant this all over and over again. You get the sense that people are qualified, not just because someone says so, but because they're able to pass a particular test, that everyone could say, that person went through the test. We know they've got what it takes. Now, in this case, Jesus is going to have a head-to-head with the devil, and here's what happens. Then Jesus, like we said, went into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. By the way, remember, Jesus wasn't wandering around like, oh my gosh, I'm in the wilderness. He was taken there. Verse 2. After fasting for 40 days and for 40 nights, shocking revelation by the Bible here, he was hungry. Man, insightful stuff. Now, I think well, apart from being incredibly obvious, it's really actually essential too, because what it says is this. Jesus wasn't someone who could fast, that is to say, go without food and water for 40 days and for 40 nights and not be hungry. Because that changes things. Because whatever he's about to do with whatever he encounters in this relationship or whatever, this encounter with the devil means, well, he's got special powers. But clearly what's happening here is he's hungry just like you and I would be hungry. So while it seems a little bit obvious, and it is, because man, if people don't eat for 40 days and 40 nights, they get pretty hungry. Now, here's what happens. It's just showing that he's got this incredible vulnerability, and when he is at his most vulnerable, this is what happens. Then the tempter came to him. Now, again, you're going to see, we're not going to go through the rest of this passage. It's an incredibly fascinating passage. You should read it on your own. But to suffice it to say, here's what happens. Ultimately, what's being set up here is Jesus is being led to a showdown with the devil. And that test is essentially a test about declining the invitations of the devil to Jesus. In other words, the devil's going to promise him things that appeal to his ego, to his appetites, to his longing, to a potential longing for power, and all of this kind of stuff. And in every case, Jesus says, I'm not going to make it to that party. I decline that invitation. In every case. There's all these shortcuts and these empty promises, and in every case, Jesus goes, no, not for me. Every case. Now, when we get what's this Jesus' uncanny ability to refuse these kinds of invitations, to decline these invitations at his weakest, is believed by the early church to be possible for us too. Now, the Apostle Paul will write to the church in Corinth, which this church is, by the way, it's a city notorious for its wild living. This is a place where people would go crazy. And the Corinthian church, by the way, has all kinds of wild problems because these people are just off the rails. And he has this passage on temptation. And he opens it actually by talking about the struggle of God's people to figure out how to pay attention, to be connected, and their inability to decline the invitations that are given to them all the time that take them down the wrong roads. Then he gets to this and he says, look, there's this whole story of these people who keep tripping over their shoes, and you're no different. So he says this. So if you think you're standing firm, 1 Corinthians 10:12, be careful that you don't fall. Now, he's essentially saying, before he's going to talk about how we deal with or how we approach temptation, what he says is we're all susceptible to it, no one's immune to it, and it's all the same stuff as everybody who's gone before you. Now, for a lot of us, that's where the whole conversation on temptation begins and ends. Hey, it's dangerous. Hey, careful, stop, be careful. That's all we get. And we're like, well, I'm constantly careful, but I keep tripping over stuff. What am I supposed to do? I just want you to know that's not where the story ends. It's just big danger sign. No. There's something else to it as well. The next verse, probably one of the most famous verses in the Bible, and it's long, but I just want you to check this out, because here's what he says. Look, don't think you're just standing firm. You got to be careful. Then he says this. Verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. In other words, there's nothing exceptional about whatever temptation you're facing. It's common to everybody else. It's all the same stuff. And you're not fighting a losing battle. Check this out. And God is faithful. He won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. Meaning, you're not losing. You don't have to lose this battle. God has already given you the ability to get out of this thing, apparently. Now, for a lot of us, we might feel like we're fighting a losing battle against temptation. And I think for a lot of us, the most powerful lie we believe about temptation, this invitation to a particular thing, is that we have no power to resist it. The most powerful lie we believe about temptation is that we have no power to resist it. We feel like Homer Simpson, who says, my only weakness is temptation, which is so insightful. And all of us go, you know what? He really was a good, he probably read the Bible a lot or whatever. But the truth is, he knows me. My only weakness is temptation. We get that. But I just want to make sure you understand something. All invitations are not obliging us to do a particular thing. We think that they are, and we act like they are, but that's not true. Because here's why this is so important. When we believe that we're powerless against an invitation, when we start acting like, well, there it is, I'm fated to go down that road. When we believe we're powerless against an invitation, we give ourselves permission to accept it. Here's why that's so important. When we believe that we're powerless against an invitation, we give ourselves permission to accept it. The reason why that works is this. If we start saying, I have no control and I'm powerless, then I'm not responsible for my own choices. You see what that is? Well, I'm powerless. Then I might as well accept it because I can't not accept it. You with me? Keep on reading. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, which means it's going to happen, there will never not be a time in your life when you are too old or too mature or whatever it might be to no longer be tempted. It will always happen. It is part of what it means. You go find an old person and run up to them and say, hey, you look old, like you never get tempted. You are an old person. Find someone on the street. Probably won't make their day if you do it like that, but more than likely if you said, man, you look old, I'm sure you never get tempted ever in your life. They will say, that is just not true. You and I, for the rest of our lives, will always and forever be the recipients of unsolicited and unwanted invitations for the rest of our lives. And listen, we're not responsible for that. We're not responsible for the fact that what shows up in our mailbox. We're not responsible for the junk mail or for the robocalls or whatever else you want to describe it as, but those things that show up, they're not our fault. It's not his fault that he was tempted in the desert. Are you with me? Jesus isn't sinning by being tempted. You see, we will always and forever be the recipients of unsolicited and unwanted invitations. That's just part of what it means to be a human being. We're not Now, I think probably the best way to say is this. We are not responsible for what gets my attention. There's lots of stuff that's vying for our attention all the time. What we are responsible for is what keeps our attention. I'm not responsible for what gets my attention, but I am responsible for what keeps my attention. There's lots of things out there. I can refuse the invitations, but as soon as I start hanging out with them, that's on me, not on the invitation. But so many people get lost in the guilt over being the recipient of an invitation. I'm being tempted. I must be a failure. The church reformer Martin Luther said this with regard to temptation. One of the most insightful things I've ever heard anybody say to this effect, because so many people beat themselves up over just merely being tempted. That's not sin. Here's what he says. You cannot keep birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from building a nest in your hair. So practical. They're there. They're flying around. They're making noise. They're attracting. They're giving you all kinds. They're getting your attention. But if you allow them, you and I allow them to make a nest in our hair. What a great illustration. Then we're kind of falling into the trap of this thing. But it's not our fault that the birds are flying out. Remember, Jesus receives the same kind of invitations that you and I do. Hebrews chapter 4 says this, that Jesus was tempted in every single way that we were or that we are, and yet he never sinned. So in essence, all that we're saying is Jesus was just way better at declining invitations than we are. Keep on reading. 1 Corinthians 10:13, continue. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. He's making a way out. He's not just simply saying, look, find your way out. You're in trouble. You screwed up, or the fact no. He's saying, look at this. When you are tempted, he will also provide a way. He's making a way. And not only that, some translations have the word so that you can stand up underneath it. Like whatever oppressive force this invitation seems to have over you, you can stand up underneath it. And he's not just simply commanding you to go a particular way. No. What he's also doing is this. He's giving you a way. This freedom from captivity that Jesus offers is being led by him and made possible through him. So, what do we do with that? A couple things we want to do. First is this. Number one, we got to get more comfortable talking about temptation. Most of us are so ashamed to talk about temptation that and actually a lot of the things that we're struggling with started out as a secret thing where there's some invitations showing up on our inbox or we're putting them on the fridge and we're not dealing with them when they're on the fridge. We're dealing with them when we're at the party, if that makes sense. For us to really get serious about some of the things that we're really up against, let's start it when we're just getting the invitations and say, you guys, I got to tell you what's going on. We got to get more comfortable with talking about temptation. I love what Rick Warren says about this. Genius. He just says, if we spent more time confessing temptation, try to catch a point here. If we spent more time talking about, look, there's these things are showing up and they're seeming pretty attractive and I want to be a part of them, maybe there would be less need for confession of sin. Now, what he's saying is, he's not saying we'll eventually end the need for confession of sin. What he is saying, though, is maybe we could short circuit some of this. That we go all the way down the road before we actually deal with this stuff. And he's just saying, why don't we just talk about it when it's temptation instead of dealing with it when it's full-blown sin? We got to get more comfortable talking about it altogether, talking about temptation to begin with. Now, here's a way to give some words to this stuff. So we're going to get more comfortable talking about it. Here's a way to give words to some of these things. And you can do these, individually in a notebook. I would say better to talk about them with someone else. But either way, here's just ways to give sort of language to this stuff. Number one, which invitations are the most compelling for you? There's lots of people who have lots of different invitations, and they're all based, the ones that are the most appealing to us are based on our appetites. So, for instance, some people are going to have different sort of temptations than you are, different invitations to different things. And just because you don't have that one does not instantly give you a chance to go, look at how wonderfully morally superior I am. I'm not even tempted by that. Remember, temptation isn't even a sin. You're not even morally superior to anything. You just didn't get an invite. Now, what is important to note is, really critical is to say, look, I'm a person, so for instance, they're based, all these invitations are based on our appetites. And it's no different than like what the internet knows about you now anyways. All the algorithms are just based on what you already kind of like, and it kind of knows when you're weak and when you're hungry and all that kind of stuff. Now, all of that stuff to say, for me, you could put a bowl of Skittles in front of me for the rest of my life. And I would always be able to walk by like, I don't care. Fruity candy, get away from me. I don't need it. But if you put a sleeve, one of those tubes of Pringles and said, eat one. I'm going to leave this room and leave you. You may have one of those. I would say, I think you meant one whole tube, because that's a thing where I'm like, that's an invitation that's most compelling. And the same thing is this. Which categories of things are going to be harder for you to decline? You should know what they are. For me, I get a little whiff of jealousy. I get a little taste of envy. And all of a sudden I start feeling the invitations to sort of start believing I'm entitled to more success or more access and more ease of life, or whatever else it might be, more capability, whatever you can imagine. And I know those are things that I start going, I'm going to start bending the arc of the universe around me. I'm going to start taking things or buying things or making things happen, or I'm going to start talking bad about them or thinking bad about them or secretly plotting for their demise or whatever else it might be. All of that stuff, these are the things that are really compelling for me. And I don't know what they are for you, but you should know which ones are most compelling for you. Secondly, what's really critical is to identify, most people miss this, is this. When are these invitations most likely to arrive? Like I said, it's weird how Amazon seems to know when you might like a particular thing. It's weird how all of the catalogs start showing up when the things that you might have purchased in the past start showing up at the same time. It's amazing, isn't it, how all of a sudden when you're at your weakest, that's when these invitations seem to be the boldest and the most clear and the most compelling. For me, I am most susceptible to these things when I'm just after some success or I am just after some failure. Remember, Jesus is approached by the devil when he's 40 days into his hunger, when he's at his weakest and at his most vulnerable. That's not an accident. I feel like when I just had something, my energy's low, my defenses are down, all of a sudden it's like, bling, something pops into my head. Like, I got it, you know what? All of a sudden, I start getting easily into, all of a sudden, whatever I'm being invited to do, it ends up on the fridge, and I start thinking about it. I start reading over the invitation, start thinking about it. And a lot of time, I end up going down the road and going, oh my gosh, how did I end up here? And it started when I was at my weakest. Which invitations are the most compelling? When are they most likely to arrive? And then third, and this is a little bit more difficult, but it's nonetheless still critical. What legitimate need is actually being revealed in this invitation? Meaning, if that invitation, whatever it comes to you, is actually really compelling, you might want to ask yourself, well, what legitimate need is actually in there? And it's, like I said, it's a little bit harder. You don't always see it. And maybe it will require some prayer to see it. And maybe it would say something like this. Maybe the prayer is as simple as this. God, what am I really after here? This feels really like I want to go down this road. What am I really after? Or in other words, maybe you could say it like this. Jesus, what problem am I trying to solve with this solution that's now being offered to me? We often get stuck. This is really important. We often get stuck because we settle for inadequate solutions to our deeper soul kinds of problems. We just don't know what else to do. And when we start feeling like we're actually addressing it, well, we just stay with it. What legitimate need might actually be sort of being revealed in you when you're searching, or these invitations come at you, or when they start feeling really compelling, or when the temptation starts to really, really grow? What's the legitimate need? Now, temptation is like everything else in the Bible that we're up against. It is a defeatable foe. And I think as we forget that all the time, it's an invitation and we're not obligated to take it, we can decline it. And it's a defeatable foe, and though we all struggle and we all stumble into it all the time, none of us has this figured out 100%. But here's what the Bible seems to come back to over and over again. Whatever you're up against, the one who is in you, Jesus, is greater than the one who is in the world. And together, just maybe, we get to decline a few more invitations this week, believing and knowing that we're not on our own, that the one who is in us is greater than the one who is in the world.
The enemy has lost its holds, for God is one and in control. The gates of hell don't stand a chance, for we know the way it all will end. Yes, we know the way it all will end. And this I know, what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for glory and turn it for good. And this I know, what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for glory and turn it for good, turn it for good. The wind and waves bow down before the one who speaks and stops the storm. The stone is gone and rolled away, and fear is just an empty grave. Oh, I know fear is just an empty grave. And this I know, what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for glory and turn it for good. And this I know, what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for glory and turn it for good, turn it for good. That is in me, I believe. Greater is he that is in me. Greater is he that is in me. He is overcoming, he is overcoming all. Greater is he that is in me, I believe. Greater is he that is in me. Whoa. Greater is he that is in me. He is overcoming, he is overcoming. overcoming all. Yeah, this I know, and what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for glory and turn it for good. Yeah, this I know, and what the enemy meant for evil, my God will use for glory and turn it for good. Yeah, this I know, what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for glory and turn it for good. Yes, this I know, what the enemy meant for evil, my God will use for glory and turn it for good. Oh, greater is He that is in me, I believe. Greater is He that is in me. Oh, greater is He that is in me. He is overcoming. He is overcoming. He is overcoming. He is overcoming all. You are overcoming all. You're overcoming now.
Thank you for joining us. If you would like to reach out to a pastor to talk about some possible next steps, get information about attending or viewing one of our live gatherings, or to make a contribution, be sure to visit our website at harborpoint.church. Also, don't forget to take a look at the discussion questions on our website to help you keep the conversation going.